flag is up, and it's good.
You're listening to The Extra Point, hosted by Phil Ruskin. Welcome.
What's up? Welcome into another episode of The Extra Point. I am your host, Phil Ruskin, joined as always, I'm not going to even say as usual, as always, with Kendall VanDerBilt. I am back from Italy. I was gone for, let's say I was gone for a minute. Most of the month of February. It is good to be back. Kendall is a trooper on Chuck Norris's 86th birthday today. Which, by the way, I'm sure, Kendall, you did not know. But now that you know that Chuck Norris did not turn 86 today, 86 turned Chuck Norris today. In that same vein of thought, no tornado warning can stop Kendall from being here. That is the level of this man's commitment. Tornadoes be damned. He's here. So, Kendall, I appreciate you for being here. Please stay safe. If at any point in the show you will become like the Wizard of Oz and blow away, we will we'll just send out some search warnings and maybe a like a little floaty device for you. But yes, stay safe over there, my friend. And well, of course, let's have a great show. So
let's do it. I got all my weatherman and off screen. I got like 6 different screens you can't see, giving me all the weather feeds in the world. So, if anyone wants to chime in with questions on the weather in the South Bend area, I've got that to a T as well.
That's right. And for those that are in California, it is 65 and the sun is setting, and we've had another day. So where the sun is also setting is on Max Crosby. You and I have been doing this a long time. I coached. I've seen professional players go through physicals. I can't remember the last time that a player, quote unquote, failed a physical, which I don't think happened. I think something occurred because they knew Max Crosby had an injury. There was documentations that he had a surgery. So I'm kind of at a loss for words here because, first of all, how does a player fail a physical when you know he has an injury? Second of all, Tua Tagovailoa has half a brain and he still can play football. So how is Max Crosby with a repaired knee not able to play for the Ravens? Like, did he bang the coach's wife? Like what? Like what? Kendall, what happened?
It feels like if they wanted this to go through, it probably would have. This doesn't really happen all that much, right? So I do feel like it was it was a little bit of funny business, but also Max has he plays a lot of games, but he plays through injury. Maybe there's something a little more to it than we thought, but I don't know. I'm not enough of an insider. I feel like I'm probably the wrong person to ask, but it definitely feels weird.
It's weird.
And with that, I have to go. I might pop back. We'll see, but I definitely got to go.
All right. Well, Kendall is off. Stay safe, my friend. I will take over. We're going to talk about some rookies tonight. We are also going to do a little bit of free agent recap because the rookies, transparently, there is a lot to go through. So I wanted to start here at the top. For those that are here in the show, we are going to do a little bit of both. But look, it's early. Okay, it's Tuesday night. It is March 10th. We've got a full 6 weeks until the draft actually starts. For those that are in the comments, jump in. Let me know how you're thinking throughout this show. I'd love to see kind of the crowdsource, what the early reads are. We're going to start at the quarterback position. If Kendall was here, if he pops back, great. We'll talk through it. If not, we'll just kind of do it myself on a solo cast tonight. Look, Mendoza is clearly the QB1 in this class. I don't think there's any question as to his draft position in the dynasty world. I think that's the bigger question because he's obviously going to go number 1 overall to the Raiders. I have a lot of questions about who the QB2 and beyond is. We'll get to that in just a second. For the purposes of tonight, here's where I'm at with Mendoza. In a single quarterback league, obviously everybody knows quarterbacks drop, not a big deal. I do think he's going to be a middle of the second round pick, and I think that's probably the right place to take him. If he rises, if you really need a quarterback, then I could see him being a late first, early second round pick. That's also okay. But I'm not questioning Mendoza's talent. I'm questioning his ceiling in the NFL. And here's why. He may end up being, and if Kendall were here, we would kind of go back and forth on this, but he may end up being a better real life quarterback than fantasy quarterback. And here's why. He doesn't run. He's a pocket passer. And I know you're all going to, listen to the show or watch the show and you say, but Phil, what about that incredible run in the national championship game? That was a hell of a run. That won the national championship for Indiana, that play alone. But he's not going to do that every week. That's not his skill set. Malik Willis just went to the Dolphins on a contract this week in free agency. Malik Willis is a runner, right? So if you want to talk about new guys, new quarterbacks in the league that are actually going to run, that's a part of their skill set. That's, their kind of go-to when the pocket breaks down is to run. Then we can have a conversation about Malik Willis. But for Mendoza, I think he's going to slot in as a high-end QB2. I've got if you guys haven't, Dynasty Sharks, shout out to Dynasty Sharks. They've got a really interesting insight on, on Mendoza. And then Football Guys actually have a rookie guide report that's out that I really like. I've actually been reading, kind of working my way through that report. It is very detailed. I really appreciate the level of detail they've gone through. But they give a player comp for all of the different rookies. And the player comp they've given, which is actually one that I really appreciate, is Matt Ryan. I think that the Mendoza archetype fits the Matt Ryan archetype. And Matt Ryan was great for years. And he was a solid quarterback for your fantasy team and for your dynasty team. So I am not sitting here trashing Mendoza at all. I just don't see a world without the rushing upside where he is consistently outside of an outlier touchdown and passing season where he's going to be a QB1. So in a super flex league, I think a lot of people are going to take Mendoza at the 102. And I don't blame you. If you need a quarterback, especially in super flex, I don't have any issues with that. But if you're fortunate enough in a super flex league to have two solid starters, and maybe a third that, fill in bye week kind of guy, I'm okay passing and taking a shot on one of these receivers. I really am, because I think Mendoza, again, is going to be a high-end QB2. I see Jamie here in the chat talking about I would rather have the rushing upside of Malik Willis over Mendoza. So would I. We're not going to talk about Willis tonight too much because I do want to get through these rookies. I do have them in, obviously, in the free agency recap. But again, the challenge with Malik Willis is his sample size is really small. He's only been a starter for 6 games. Kurt Warner put out a tweet that he had 28 meaningful snaps, meaning not designed runs or scrambles, but actual dropbacks in the pocket where he had to actually play football and be a quarterback. So to me, I really like Mendoza, but I don't have a huge issue with anybody in a super flex league that's got 2 solid starters and maybe a third quarterback if they want to go take a shot on Tate, Lemon, or Tyson. I think that's where I'm saying right now is you don't have to take Mendoza at the 101, the 102. In a super flex league, I still think Jeremiah Love should be the 101 over Mendoza. And that's where I'm at with that one. So after Mendoza, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of interest in this quarterback class. I have a huge issue over the last couple years. We've started to see a trend with nobody wanted older quarterbacks. Nobody wanted older players. And then all of a sudden the trend started to switch to, well, the Bo Nixes of the world started to look a little better because they had played 50, 60 college football games and had started for 4 or 5 years. And Bo Nix has had a great first 2 years in the NFL. And so I think you're starting to see guys at the GM level say, maybe it's not the worst thing for us to take a guy who may be a little bit older in his age, but he's got more experience. He's played rather than, a young Trey Lance and Anthony Richardson, guys that are projects, respectfully. And it's not to say they're not great athletes, but they clearly haven't to this date, and I don't think are going to work in the NFL. So Ty Simpson is interesting. Carson Beck is interesting. Nussmeier's interesting, but I think a lot of it's going to depend on landing spot. I think Ty Simpson is probably a day 2 pick, 2nd round, 3rd round. I know there's some hype and some buzz around maybe the Jets trading back in to the first round to go and get him. I don't trust anything the Jets do. They just signed Geno Smith today. So we'll see what that looks like. But my personal take is I'm never off of a player, and I want to make sure that that's very clear. You should never have a player completely off your board. Everyone is available at the right price, and everyone should be drafted at a certain place in the draft, depending on where the value is just at that point simply too good to pass on. So if I'm on the clock in the middle of the second round in a rookie, in a super flex rookie draft, I might take a Ty Simpson there, because worst case scenario, I can stick him on my taxi squad for a season and just see what I have. If I'm going to do that transparently, I'm probably going to take a Taylor Green in the third round or fourth round if he's there, because of the upside, especially if it's a taxi squad guy. Taylor Green does kind of have that Anthony Richardson, Trey Lance sort of vibe. It hasn't worked. It could, but again, for a player that's going to sit on my taxi squad, he's not going to hurt me. But again, the Ty Simpsons of the world, I have some reservations because the sample size is super small, and what we've seen from guys who haven't played a lot of college football, it hasn't worked lately. In the opposite side of that, I would be interested in taking Carson Beck in the third round of a super flex league. I don't anticipate him being a starter. He profiles as a backup player. I think at this point, everyone sort of assumes the Jets are going to take somebody, because Geno's not going to be their bridge. Carson Wentz is still available. So that could be an interesting, play there, is to bring Carson Wentz back. But I just don't see a world where this quarterback class outside of Mendoza are guys that I'm going to be reaching for, trading up for, and I'm probably not going to have a lot of exposure to, even in Superflex. So if you disagree, or if you have your own takes, like I said, it's a challenge tonight without Kendall to have kind of the back and forth. So Jamie in my chat here blowing it up, and I love it, man. Appreciate you, buddy. I see Ty Simpson in the mid-second like Penix was. I'm okay with that in a super flex league. I think if that's a place where you feel there's a tier break, and there is a big tier break at the wide receiver position, I would certainly take a shot on Ty Simpson in the middle of the second round in a super flex league. I probably want to start scooping up some later second round running backs if there's guys still available. But I do think right now that I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to reach too early in the draft or trade up. It's just not, this just isn't the year. This isn't the year at the quarterback position. So let's talk about some big, sexy names here at the running back position. Of course, it's Jeremiah Love. I don't think there's any question he's the 101 in a single quarterback league. And again, I already said it, I'll say it again. I think he's the 101 even in a super flex league. It's hard to get a running back that has the 3-down skill set who fails right now. I mean, Bijan hit, Gibbs hit, and that's the kind of company that he's being compared to. I mean, Omarion Hampton looks great. Ashton Genty had a atrocious offensive line, the coaching staff. I mean, everything about the Raiders last year was a mess. But there was some games when Genty looked good. Genty looked what we saw was some previews of what we hope and believe it's going to look like. So when Jeremiah Love is in that same kind of category with these guys, and those are the names that he's being mentioned to or likened and compared to me, that's a player that I'm going to still take even in a super flex league at the 101. So the real question is, who's the RB2 in this class? And if you're in the chat, and I know we've got a bunch of folks here in the chat, throw me your RB2, because everybody listens to the similar podcasts. We all read the same articles. Everybody's goes to the same rankings, sites. And there's a big disparity. I think if you have a certain conviction about a guy, then that's fine. A lot of guys are going to put emphasis on what happened in the combine. So Mike Washington Jr. out of Arkansas, his name is exploded right now. I struggle with the combine. It's the underwear Olympics, as I like to call it. I'm not saying that because you can run fast and do a great broad jump and have a great vert and bench press the world that you're not a good athlete. But Anthony Richardson, who I love, if you don't know, I'm from Gainesville, Florida. I am always going to root. I mean, I'd always draft them if they're not good for my team, but I'm always going to root for any Florida Gator to have success in the NFL. Anthony Richard destroyed the combine and has not done anything in the NFL. So I don't put a lot of emphasis on combine hero. Kendall knows this because we've gone back and forth on this one a ton, but Xavier Worthy is the fastest man in combine history. And I was still off, and everybody was, oh, Xavier Worthy, how could you hate him, Phil? It's not that I hated him. I just didn't think his skill set and his size was going to translate to the NFL, and that he was going to be a high volume wide receiver one for the whoever he was drafted by, which ended up being the Chiefs. His combine time and the fact that he went to the Chiefs cemented him as a first round draft pick in dynasty drafts, and he's fine. But it's not somebody that has really set the world on fire. And at the end of the day, it wasn't worth the investment of where you drafted him. Not for a wide receiver 33 and a wide receiver 59 finish his first 2 years. And his first year, he played all 17 games. So don't put everything in the combine. I think what I would encourage everyone to do is use the combine to actually take what you believe and then potentially bring that player back down a notch or two. So if a player ran really, really fast, that's great. But what does he look like on the field? Because there's guys who, Emmett Johnson, I don't think had the world's fastest 40 time. I don't have it in front of me. If my mind was right, his was a little slower. But he looks good when he plays football. And I think that's the key, is like, what does a guy look like when he's got pads on? So to come back to my question, who's the RB2 in this class? I think a lot of people like Jadarian Price. He seems to be more of the RB2. Again, not consensus, but he seems to be somebody that I see him as the RB2 more so than not. And the other one I see is Jonah Coleman. I like Jonah Coleman. Jonah Coleman's number 2 in my rankings right now as the RB2 in this class. A lot can change with draft capital. We still have pro days to go. And here's why I have him ahead of Jadarian Price. It's the Roschon Johnson effect. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, a couple years ago when Bijan came out, everybody said, well, don't forget about Roschon. He didn't get on the field at Texas because Bijan was there, and Bijan's one of a kind and he's a generational talent, and Roschon's going to be the next best thing. And if Bijan hadn't been at Texas, Roschon would have done 85% of what Bijan did. And Roschon has lost his job to a 7th round Kyle Monangai for the Bears, and he's just not been able to get on the field. So I do have some reservation around Jadarian Price because of that. That's my own personal. I try not that. We all try really hard not to have bias. We try to go into a rookie draft. We try to go into our rankings and evaluate just completely neutral, but it's bullshit. We all have at least a little bit of bias. I have a little bit of hesitation around Jadarian Price, and that's one to say at the end of the day, Jeremiah Love is that dude, and he is special, and that should keep a player off of the field. But at the end of the day, was the player not on the field because he wasn't good enough? Or was he not on the field because the dude was just so much better? Or was it a little bit of both? And so with Jadarian Price, I think it's a little bit of both. So I know that these running backs are going to get steamed up and someone is going to rise. And so I'm going to give you another cautionary tale. I'm going to give you 2 names from last year. Roschon, I'm looking at a comment about Roschon Johnson. Jamie, I love that comment. I'll throw that here in a second. Caleb Johnson, and RJ Harvey. And if you remember, RJ Harvey was probably a 2nd round pick, maybe a borderline 3rd round pick in certain circles. I think he was pretty firmly in my mind in the 2nd round of rookie drafts last year. And then all of a sudden he gets drafted by Denver. J.K. Dobbins is coming off of an injury. J.K. Dobbins is always hurt. Sean Payton uses multiple running backs. And I think the wide assumption was RJ Harvey's that dude. This guy's going to be the starting running back in a good offense for Sean Payton. And J.K. Dobbins is going to be dust. And right now it looks very much like J.K. Dobbins, especially after this week with getting the new contract and having been the guy most of last year. It looks like if you spent the 107 to 112, which is where he went, RJ Harvey, in most of the drafts, that pick probably burned you. And the same with Caleb Johnson. People were hot and bothered for Caleb Johnson, right? It's not a great backfield. Pittsburgh never really had a guy. Is Jalen Warren really that dude? Caleb Johnson's going to win the job. And then this week, Kenny G gets traded to the Bucks. Jalen Warren is still under contract. And all of a sudden we're saying, Caleb Johnson truthers are loud and loud and loud on Twitter. Here it comes, Caleb Johnson for about 2 hours. And now I have questions about Jalen Warren. We're not going to talk about Jalen Warren tonight, but I think it's very possible Rico Dowdle takes over that backfield. Very possible. So I think at the end of the day, we've got to have a little bit of, not recency bias, but you just have to carry a little bit of that doubt in your mind, because again, you can't just let the combine and draft capital solely determine where you're taking a player. You still got to watch the film. You still have to ask yourself, what do you believe? And I think at the end of the day, you guys have to remember this. There are very few situations in the NFL where there is one running back who is a bell cow who gets everything. I think as much as we all love the fact that Monty just got traded to Houston and Gibbs was the dude and Gibbs is going to be the dude, Pacheco's not as good as Monty is. We all know that. But there's going to be times when Pacheco plays. He's going to have to play, and he's going to vulture some touchdowns from Gibbs. It's going to happen, right? So and I'm not sitting here saying that Gibbs is not deserving of the overall RB1 or RB2 in a startup draft. Of course he is. But even Gibbs, even Bijan, who had Tyler Algier, who's going to get somebody. The Falcons are going to sign someone. They're going to bring somebody in. If Rachaad White didn't play for the Bucs, I know he's getting steamed up to Seattle. Rachaad White could be an easy fit. It's in division, so I don't think it happens. Rachaad White could be an easy fit to be the backup to Bijan and complementary back. So, Brian Robinson probably going to go back to the Niners. So even Christian McCaffrey, Bijan, Gibbs, all these guys have somebody. So I think it's just a question of, when you're looking at these rookies, who has a clean path to playing time? Who's and this is the other thing I want people to remember. Who's playing for a coaching staff that has shown that they want to get a rookie involved, right? Nobody wants to be part of a committee. Arizona is a mess right now. You got Tyler Algier, you got James Conner, you got Trey Benson. That's a mess. But if you look at some of these other teams, if Atlanta takes a rookie, if Atlanta takes Mike Washington Jr. in the 3rd round, that to me says that's a player that I would consider taking over maybe some of these other guys who are on paper better prospects, because Atlanta has shown that they're going to use multiple running backs. Now it's Kevin Stefanski. It's a new system, but Stefanski used multiple running backs when he was in Cleveland. So I think you have to look at where can you find some value with some of these running backs. So as we look at this class again, the RB2 to me is very much up in the air. And then obviously from there down, it's tough. It's tough. I think we're going to see a lot of, between the 109 and 112, I think you're going to see a lot of differences in the multiple leagues that you guys are all in with who gets drafted from the 109 to the 112. Let's talk about some wide receiver. Oh, let's see if we got in the comments here. Yep, RB2 has Coleman. I think we've got Jamie Pirog here saying he might be skipping him. I mean, it's early to say you're going to skip somebody, but at the end of the day, I don't really have a huge issue with anybody who's got a certain take on a player at the RB2 position. Again, it's early. A lot's going to change over the next 4 to 6 weeks between pro days and hype and all the news, and then of course draft capital. But Mike Washington Jr., could be a 2nd round player. I think he probably would have been in the 3rd before the combine. Now he's definitely in the 2nd round because of this. But again, is he worth that? We have to find that out. Wicked Pompano, been a minute, my dude. Sitting at the 110 in a tight end premium start 2. I'm weak at running back. Highly considering Stowers from Vanderbilt for my pick. I think that sums up my feelings about RB outside of Love and maybe Price. At the 110 in a tight end premium, I'm going to be very transparent, as I always am. I would probably still take one of these wide receivers, which is actually what I'm going to talk about next. So this question I chose to bring up because I'm going to leave it on the screen here. I think that I think the first 5 picks are pretty set in a super flex league. I think it's going to be Mendoza, Love, and then the big 3 at wide receiver, Tate, Lemon, Tyson. You can decide what order they're in. If you have a certain conviction about one of the receivers, fine, that's great. But those are going to be the first 5 picks. And then I think you have a next tier outside of those big 3. And as of today, again, a lot can change, but it seems to be Denzel Boston, KC Concepcion, and then it looks like Cooper Jr. That's what it seems like. It sounds like. I think it was Cleveland who just put out on their Twitter account this week, they're bringing Cooper Jr. in for a top 30 visit. You're not taking a top 30 visit and bringing a prospect in if you're not serious about taking him in the first round, probably in the second round as well. So there's some hype around there. Again, it's early, but to me, that's kind of I'm calling them the group of 6 wide receivers. So if you take those 6, you take the other 2 guys, Love, and you take Mendoza in a super flex league, that's the first 8 picks. And I said a minute ago, between 9 and 12, I think you're going to see a lot of disparity. If Kenyon Sadiq goes to a place where he is going to be a day one starter and he's the guy, he's going to slot into the first 8 picks, which takes us to the 109. I still think there's some guys at the 110 that I would consider at the wide receiver position. If there's a clear indication or a really great landing spot for one of these running backs at the 109, at the 110, I'm okay taking a shot on the RB2 in the class there. I'm okay taking Stowers at the 110 if it's a tight end premium and you have to start. Then this league is Wicked Pompano. If you've got to start 2 tight ends, then that warrants that pick. I think most leagues, even a tight end premium, you're still only starting 1 tight end. I don't have a huge issue in tight end premium taking a tight end over one of the running backs, but again, it's got to be a clean spot. You know, if Stowers winds up going in the second or third round, let's say he goes in the third round, so the second half of day 2, and he goes to the Chiefs, I'd probably take the running back at that point because it's at least one more year with Kelsey, at least. And then does Kelsey play again next season? We don't know. He is on a 1-year contract. So if he goes, you know, if Stowers were to go, I'm trying to think who really needs a tight end right now. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you think of some place where it's like a clean path, then maybe. So I think it's early to say like I'm going to be out on this group of players and pivot, but I do think at the 109, at the 110, regardless of how the draft shakes out, that's where it is time to start thinking about a pivot. So I like that concept of, hey, the premium wide receivers are gone. It's too early for a quarterback here because I just don't love them. Sadiq's off the board. I think you could throw another position in there. Sorry. So I think one of the questions I had for Kendall is this just a super heavy wide receiver draft? Are we fading first round running backs and hammering away at wide receivers? Kendall and I were chatting earlier today. Obviously, he's been informing me about the weather all day today. So we've kind of been on the phone and on the text message threads for a while. But one of the things that I said when we were on the phone earlier today, and we actually just talked about it in the green room before the show, was I'm looking at my own teams. And most of my teams, if you guys have listened to this show ever, you guys know I tend to draft heavy wide receivers, and I kind of piece it together at the running back position. I'm usually a big fan of having a hero RB, getting myself a Bijan, a Gibbs, drafting an Omari and Hampton or a Genty, you know, or trading for those guys, and then kind of piecing together my RB2, you know, through 2 or 3 guys and kind of like streaming the position from my bench, if you will. I play in a lot of PPR leagues, so I'm almost not exclusively, but I'm most of my rosters are pretty wide receiver heavy. Wide receivers tend to hold their value longer. They tend to have a little bit longer lifespan in the NFL versus the running backs. Case in point, you know, you can take a look at Austin Eckler. I traded Austin Eckler his last year at the Chargers to a friend of mine in one of my leagues. Literally, it's a 12-team league. There was 11 other guys in the league. 9 of them were DMing me. How could you trade Austin Eckler? What are you thinking? Your team's going to suck. I ended up getting what became the 104, I think, out of that trade. And then I used that to trade up into Bijan. So pretty darn happy with how that ended up working out for me. Obviously, that's sort of an outlier example, but it's okay to trade a big-time player, whereas wide receivers, I think you're going to end up holding them for a lot longer. So I think for me, the comment that I shared with Kendall was in a lot of my leagues where I've got multiple first-round picks, you know, two, maybe 3 first-rounders, I'm going to be okay coming away with 3 wide receivers in a draft. You know, or I've got 2 firsts and 2 seconds, for example. I'm going to be okay coming away with 3 wide receivers and 1 running back in this draft. And I know everyone always needs running backs. Everybody always wants running backs. It is, you know, it's obviously the position that has the highest turnover. It certainly has the most injuries. But at the end of the day, I'm struggling to see this running back class as anything more than Love, and then insert one guy that's probably going to rise here. I think this is going to be more in the likes. This running back class is going to be more in the likes of the Benson Brooks from 2 years ago, where we just didn't like anybody that came out, versus the 3 years ago when it was Bijan, Gibbs, and Achane who all came out in the same draft class. I really like Tate in this draft. I do think Carnell Tate's going to be the first wide receiver taken. That's my early lean. It's an Ohio State wide receiver. It is the other than LSU, it's the wide receiver factory. So I think Carnell Tate to me he's number one on my board right now. I do have Jordan Tyson number 2 on my board and Lemon 3rd. I don't want people to worry about the funky interviews and that he blew it at the combine. Let me remind everybody of a comment that was made about Malik Neighbors 2 years ago when Malik Neighbors was being drafted. Everyone said he might struggle to have success in a big market. He would be better going to a smaller market team. He went to the second largest, or the actual largest media market in the country, and he's been fantastic. So I'm not concerned about Lemon's character. You may not love it. Could he have been more polished? Sure. Could he probably have done, I don't know what was said in those meetings, but could he have done better in his meetings? I'm sure he could have. But at the end of the day, the kid's football ability is what's going to get him a job. And I think the football ability is going to show through. So I have it Tate, Tyson, Lemon as of today. Again, that could change. If you have a particular conviction about any of these big three, that's fine. But again, I do think it's a big three, and I think you're going to be really happy with all 3 of these guys. I don't really see a world where any of these 3 don't get drafted in the first round. I just can't see it. So I do think you're going to have 3 first round wide receivers in the real draft, and certainly the first 3 wide receivers off the board in your draft, super flex or single quarterback. I like Denzel Boston. I really like Casey Concepcion. I'll be honest. Concepcion is 4 in my rankings right now. I do think he's probably going to sneak into the first round as well. Boston could, and then Omar Cooper Jr. could as well. So I think those guys kind of make up my next tier of 3. If I am in the middle, 4 to 7, 4 to 8 range, I'm going to be drafting probably all 6 of those players over whoever the running back 2 is. Again, landing spot might change that. It is early. A lot can change. But as of today, March 10th, that's how I see this class is pretty strong at the wide receiver position. And again, I think a lot of people are looking at it that way. So if you have a 2-0, let's say you have the 204, I think that's a great place to go grab a running back instead of maybe grabbing a running back in the first round. I would certainly look to try to take in the early second round, or in the second half of the second round. That's where I'd really attack running back, because I do think that the ceilings for these wide receivers are going to be a whole lot higher than this running back class when all is said and done. So Jamie jumping in here, not too dissimilar to my rankings. I see Concepcion, Boston, and Cooper at the end of the first round of the draft. I agree. Elijah Surratt, I like him as well out of Indiana. I think he's an interesting prospect. So to me, it's like there's more players we're talking about who we anticipate. Sorry, let me back up for 1 second. There's more wide receivers that we're talking about who have good profiles, who we like the college tape on, who had a decent combine, who are also getting the first round buzz of being NFL first round draft picks. And to me, draft capital makes a big difference. I know that the trend has been, no, don't draft the super high first round running back, because Bijan and Gibbs are sort of outliers. Love's going to be a first rounder. We all know someone else is going to go in the first round, but I do see a world where outside of Love and maybe one other guy, there are no other running backs drafted until day 2. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. We'll see. The NFL always needs running backs, but you also have a pretty deep running back class in terms of draft prospects that have come out the last couple of years, of guys that have hit, that have become starters or at least valuable pieces into their team. And I think at the end of the day, that means there's less jobs, right? Like there's just less available for guys who are coming out. Now, Jeremiah Love's a different talent. If he goes to Tennessee, I think people are going to be bummed. I do. But look, he should get most of the work. They'll still bring someone in, or they'll re-sign Tony Pollard. But I see a world where people could be upset with the landing spot if Jeremiah Love winds up in Tennessee. But if Carnell Tate goes to Tennessee, people are going to be stoked because he's clearly the wide receiver one. They've got to throw it to somebody. The running game, that means they're not spending a first round on a running back. So, you've got Cam Ward, who's a young quarterback, needs a big target. That, to me, there's a big difference there with the ceiling for the wide receiver, even in a less sexy landing spot than there is for Love. So keep your eyes on these first round wide receivers. I definitely think you guys should do your research and continue to watch film, listen to podcasts, read. I think reading's the easiest thing to do while you're sitting on the toilet or going to bed at night or whatever. You're just taking 15 minutes on your lunch break. Read an article. There's a ton of great writers out there. I write my own articles. Like, there's just a ton of information that I think you can use to try to find that little edge. That's what the extra point is all about, is finding these little edges. As we get closer over the next couple of weeks, Kendall and I are going to really break down this wide receiver class. Obviously, we'll break down all of the rookies, but we're going to really hammer away on the wide receivers because I think there's a lot of value to be extracted from this draft and from this wide receiver class. Let's jump in on the tight end position. Look, guys, if you've done any sort of a fantasy draft, whether it's a redraft or you've done any sort of a dynasty, even a best ball, you know that tight end is tough. It's the toughest position in the league to draft. It's literally the reason why tight end premium was invented, was to make it so that the guys that aren't in the top 3, I'll call it the top 5 tight ends, could have more value for your team because they were providing you with nothing. And so I think when you look at this tight end class, there are a lot of late round sleepers. I think what we've got right now is, I think this is warranted, but I think you've got a pretty clear indication that Kenyon Sadiq is the tight end one in this class. Everything that I read, everything that I hear is that he is going to go inside the top 15. I think that's going to scare some people because of Kyle Pitts. Again, I'm from Gainesville, Florida. I love the Gators. Go Gators. At the end of the day, I'm always going to root for Gators to do well. But Kyle Pitts had his best season this year, and he's in year 5. So I think there will be some people that will be scared because of Pitts if Kenyon Sadiq goes super high. On the inverse of that, take a look at the last couple years with Brock Bowers, with Sam Laporta. I think you're going to have people that say, I don't care about Kyle Pitts. It took him forever to, quote unquote, break out. It took him forever to become really relevant. But look what Bowers did. Look what Laporta did. Look what Trey McBride really only took 2 years. His rookie season was rough. But then obviously he had a great year 2, and then he got the bag, and then he just finishes the tight end 1 this last season. So I'm going to take a shot on Sadiq, but I'm not going to take a shot on Sadiq outside of a tight end premium league until at least the 106. It's the earliest I would take him. I think you've got to consider these top 3 receivers. You've got to take Love. If you have a conviction in a super flex league, Mendoza's going to go. But if you have a conviction about another receiver, or if you have a conviction strongly about the RB2, I'm okay with that at the 106. But that's the earliest that I would take Sadiq. If you are, this is one of the best advices that I can give. Know your league. Know how guys draft. Every guy in your league has tendencies. I'm in a ton of leagues. If you play with me or you've played against me, I have tendencies. It's pretty easy. I'm probably going to take a wide receiver if push comes to shove. But I do think one of the things that you should do is go back and look at the preview. You can do it on Sleeper. Everyone has the ability to do this. Go back and look at your previous leagues. What have guys taken? Do you have a guy in your league who is historically going to be a draft for need or a draft best available? Because there are 2 types of drafters, right? If you're a guy that's going to draft for need and you don't have a tight end and you see Sadiq sitting there, you might see Sadiq go at the 105, maybe the 104. I wouldn't recommend that, but that's me. It doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means that that's not where I feel like the highest ceiling is, because wide receivers and running backs have a higher ceiling than tight ends do. When Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce were at the peak of their careers, they were finishing higher than most of the wide receivers, but they were still finishing as like wide receiver 12 or wide receiver 15 had they been in the wide receiver scoring as a tight end. But we haven't really seen that outside of Bowers and then the one season, which was super touchdown heavy from Sam Laporta. So Kenyon Sadiq is really interesting to me for two reasons. Number one, he's a physical freak. And the one thing I said earlier about don't measure everything on the combine, tight ends that do really well at the combine actually do translate to the NFL. That's a proven stat. So I'm okay if you want to take the shot on Sadiq because of the physical profile. The years that he had at Oregon were good. They weren't great. So that's something to consider as well. He didn't command a massive target share. Dante Moore runs. So that was, something to consider as well, as Dante Moore probably took a couple of touchdowns away from Sadiq last season because he was able to scramble and get into the end zone on runs. I think if Sadiq gets into a really good landing spot, especially in a place where he can be a Mark Andrews / a Travis Kelce archetype, and I'm not talking about his career archetype, I'm talking about the fact that he can actually be the number one receiver for his team at the tight end position like those guys were. Or maybe he lands in a place where they have, the Jets, for example. Mason Taylor, I know they took Mason Taylor last year, but it's really, it's Garrett Wilson, and then the Jets just signed somebody actually. Oh no, they're being projected to sign a wide receiver. But my point is that if Sadiq lands in a place where he could actually end up being the number 2 target earner, I think that measures really, really well. Don't sleep on Eli Stowers. I like the kid. I think he's a good player. I think he's got good metrics. He's not a blocking tight end. I think there's players, there's people around, kind of the dynasty circles right now. They say, well, what about Max Clare at Ohio State, right? He's more of a blocker, right? I would put Max Clare in that Michael Mayer category. I think that's a decent comp. Could he do it? Yes. Can he catch passes? Of course. Is he going to be a target earner? No. I think he's going to be a guy that's a tight end that catches passes versus a guy that's a tight end that that earns targets. And there is a difference. Michael Trigg out of Baylor, I like. I actually have Trigg one spot higher. I have Clare at 4 in my rankings, not at 3. But Stowers isn't really a blocker. He's a pass catcher. And so I think he's probably an early second round player, tight end premium. If you're convinced of the tier break and you're just not in love with that third tier of wide receiver, I'm okay taking it there. Outside of the tight end premium, I'm probably going to have Stowers in the early second round. That's where I'm going to at least be targeting him. And I'm going to be okay if somebody at the 111, 112 decides to take him and I'm at the 202. I actually do have a couple of 202 and 203 picks in my bag in a couple of my leagues. That's where I'm personally targeting him. And if I miss out, I'll pivot and grab a wide receiver or a running back at the 202, 203. But I think Sadiq is going to be a player that's clearly going to go and I think deserves to be in the first round of your draft, and then Stowers. So after that, I think the third round is where you can target those tight ends. If you're really interested in grabbing an extra tight end or two, maybe a taxi squad guy, Michael Trigg would be a really interesting name to kind of throw on your taxi squad and see what he can become. Max Clare's fine. Everyone, like I said, everyone has a point in the draft where you're just going to say, it's too much value for me to pass on. I think that's where you can take a Max Clare and just let him sit on the taxi squad for a season, see what you get. If you get, a second half of the season like Arondé Gadsden Jr. had last year, you're ecstatic. If you get the next Michael Mayer, it's not going to cost you anything in the third round. So we will get deeper and deeper into the metrics and the statistics and all of the things that you guys need to know for these running backs, for these wide receivers. We will talk quarterback and tight end, not a ton because it's just not super deep. So over the next couple of weeks, Kendall and I are going to pretty heavily focus on the running backs and the wide receivers because that is where I think you guys should be targeting. Even in Superflex, I would still target those guys over probably the Ty Simpsons, and the Garrett Nussmeyers and the Carson Becks of the world. So we are going to switch gears a little bit because yesterday was a frenzy. I saw the clip from, I'm sure you all saw it as well, but from Adam Schefter on Get Up on the early morning. And he was like, the early tampering period is a crock of shit. And he's like, it's basically free agency on Monday because technically free agency doesn't start until tomorrow, Wednesday at noon, technically. But free agency was yesterday, let's be honest. So this was just, I be honest, I've got 3 screens at work. I keep two of my screens, obviously, to do my job and to work. And I kind of keep one of them up for sports and kind of, fantasy stuff throughout the day. Even I had a hard time keeping up. The news was coming fast and furious. So let's start at the top. KW3, I think, to me, even though it wasn't the biggest contract, it was certainly the biggest name and the best landing spot. So I think moving from the Seahawks to the Chiefs is phenomenal. Again, I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and the same warning that I heard is the same warning. It's funny because when they were doing it, I was like, yep, that's exactly what I was going to say on my show tonight. Be careful around overdrafting KW3. Just be careful. Is he the guy? Yes. Is it a prolific offense? Yes. Is he going to get everything? No. They are going to sign somebody. It could be Kareem Hunt. It could be. And if it's Kareem Hunt, it's not terrible, of course, because Walker's still going to be the guy. But that means that he's going to vulture a couple goal line touchdowns. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not, because Kareem Hunt's old at this point. And I think literally that's, Pacheco. Obviously, Pacheco's not there anymore, going to Detroit. But I'm talking about last year's team with Hunt and Pacheco and Brashard Smith. Like it just wasn't sexy, right? And then Mahomes does his knee. Rashee Rice has his suspension. So the Chiefs were a bit of a mess last year. So I think bringing in Kenneth Walker is phenomenal. I think it's bad for the league. Me as a Niners fan, not great. I love that he's out of my division, but I don't love that he went to the Chiefs. So here's what I'm going to say. If you're in a dynasty startup draft, I have no problem if you want to take Kenneth Walker in the first round as your RB1. None. No problem with that. Go for it. I think that's a perfect pick in the 110, 111, 112 range, right? After the big time, running backs go. I have Kenneth Walker all the way up at RB5. I could see him at RB4 right now in my rankings, right? I've still got Bijan and Gibbs ahead, but if you have a conviction that you want to put Kenneth Walker, in the same category as JT, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I'd still take JT, but I don't have a problem if somebody wants to pull the trigger on Kenneth Walker at the 1-2 turn, at the 110, 11, 12. Again, they're going to sign somebody, but I think this move is great for him. I think it's good for the Chiefs. If you have him in Dynasty, and I do in one of my leagues, I was going to sell Kenneth Walker. I'm going to be honest. I think I'm going to hold him now and see what I can get out of the Chiefs for at least another year. He's had his injury history, right? He's missed some time. He was healthy this year. Charbonnet, of course, missing, not the second half, but kind of the third quarter, the last quarter of the season, making the playoff run. So Walker's hot right now. He's a hot name, but just be careful not to overdraft and to be too hot and bothered, because again, they're going to sign somebody, and he's not going to get, 90% of the work. It's just not going to happen. So the other player, of course, that got a big contract, Travis Etienne. And this one was a little bit of a surprise to me, not because he moved and not because he got a bag, but because of the size of the contract, $52 million. I like Travis Etienne. He's, if my memory's right, I can pull it real quick, but I think he's 26 years old. So he's certainly in his prime. I think at the end of the day, going to the Saints is a good move for him. The money says that Alvin Kamara is not going to return to the Saints. With Kamara's injury history, with his age, I don't know what kind of person Alvin Kamara is. He's pretty quiet. I mean, he got in a fight a couple years ago at the Super Bowl in Vegas, but whatever. He's just not a very loud guy, and he's not a social media guy. So to me, it's like, would he take a smaller contract to stay on the Saints? Would he demand a starting job somewhere else? Is someone going to pay him to be the starter somewhere else? I don't know the answer to that. So I don't know that Kamara is on the Saints. If he is, that's obviously going to be kind of I'll call it the 1C, because I don't think he's the 1B. I think he's truly the 2 to Etienne, but Etienne to the Saints is a good move. So if you have Etienne in Dynasty, here's where I'm at with Etienne. I put him on the block just to see what I could get. And I got a lot of, I'll say decent. I haven't traded him yet, but I got a lot of decent offers, a couple offers actually that made me think. And so when I look at Travis Etienne, I know I think he was RB10 this year. I have to pull it real quick. I'm pretty sure he was RB10 this year. Let me pull it. But I don't know if he was RB10. I don't know if he repeats that on the Saints. I think the Jaguars are a better team. They had a good season. They're a playoff team. I think the Saints are still a year away. I like Tyler Shuck. I think he's fine. We all like Chris Olave. Chris Olave, when he's healthy, is fantastic. He had a phenomenal year. It's nice when Derek Carr's not throwing you concussion balls over the middle of the field. But I still don't think, Kellen Moore's the head coach. We like his offense. I just don't see a path for the Saints to really be that good this year. And again, you don't have to be a playoff team to have fantasy value. There's plenty of players who don't make the playoffs who are incredibly fantasy relevant. But I just don't know that the Saints as a football team are going to be good enough to score enough points for Etienne to really have an outlier touchdown season. And I think you need some of those, not outliers, but I think you need a high upside touchdown season to really break into the top 10, top 12. So I don't think he repeats as an RB1. I see him as kind of a high upside RB2, but I think he's probably going to finish in that 12, but I'd say probably in that 14 to 18 range. So my point is, if you want to put Travis Etienne on the trade block, do it. See what you can get. Because if you're super deep at running back, which most people are not, right? Obviously, we all need running backs. We all want running backs on our rosters because they get hurt. We need them, right? They get sold. Their shelf life just isn't what it is. But if you are somehow super deep at running back, or you can afford to go and trade Travis Etienne out, I think right now is a great time to sell high. I think you can get it. Put it this way. If I could get the 105, and this is why I have an offer right now for Etienne that's a second half first round pick. There's some other stuff sprinkled in, but that's where I'm looking, as I said, outside the top 8 guys. That's where I would consider at the 109 taking the RB2 in this class. Anything inside the top 8, I'm taking Mendoza or Mendoza and Love. I'm taking all wide receivers before I take the RB2 in this class. So if you're super deep at running back and you could get inside the top 7, top 6 picks, I think there's more value there for one of these wide receivers. If you can afford to trade Etienne, I would at least consider it. I would look at it. So Alex Pierce, this one I really wish Kendall was here because it's his boy. He loves him. I'm going to give Kendall his flowers. He has been on Alex Pierce for the last 2 seasons easily. And he's been really on him as a big contributor this last year. So going to give him his victory lap because he has absolutely planted his Alex Pierce's solid flag, and Indianapolis agrees. The question I had for Kendall was, is this a market value contract or did he get overpaid? Because I saw the contract and I literally, no exaggeration, I saw it and I was walking from my kitchen back downstairs here to my office and I went, whoa. And I had to catch myself because I was at the top of the stairs and I really didn't want to fall down the stairs for Alex Pierce. But it's a bag. And then about an hour after he gets the bag, 2 hours after he gets the bag, Michael Pittman to Pittsburgh is announced. So Pierce is the number 1 receiver. I thought I saw a tweet today that said Daniel Jones signed his contract, but maybe it's just that they're getting close. So I think there is an interesting situation brewing where Daniel Jones seems to be getting the contract he wants and is going to be there. And Alex Pierce just got the contract he wants and deserves. So I think Alex Pierce is in a great spot. If you have him, I wouldn't sell him. I'd hold him. I think you got to see what he is this season. And I think if it's Alex Pierce is on your dynasty roster and he's probably a wide receiver 3 on your dynasty roster, let's be honest, I think you have a guy that can finish in the top 24. So I think you got a big boost on your dynasty roster if you have Alex Pierce. You are a Alex Pierce manager. That's a winner in my mind in free agency today. Well, yesterday, but this next guy, I'm going to be honest. Michael Pittman to Pittsburgh. I don't know what to make of it. First of all, there is no quarterback in Pittsburgh as of today. It's a jugs machine standing behind the offensive line because Mr. Ayahuasca himself is going to go and do his ayahuasca retreat. He'll sit in the dark room And then he's going to probably do what we all think is going to happen, which is going to come back and let the media, give him all the attention, for him to eventually say, I've got a little more football. I can still play. I'm going to give it one last go with Mike McCarthy, and this will be my last Michael Jordan last dance. I do think Michael Pittman's going to be the one in this offense. DK Metcalf he doesn't look good. He's fighting fans. He didn't look good last year with Rodgers in what we thought would be, a target consumption hog, because they didn't have a wide receiver 2. They didn't have anybody, right? They just didn't have a single. Sorry, there's some Max Crosby news breaking. He just didn't have a single piece of competition there. And he finished as the wide receiver 26. He didn't even put up a top 24 season with no competition. And didn't get anywhere close to double-digit touchdowns, didn't hit 1,000 yards. So, and he played 15 games. So I think Pittman will be the one in Pittsburgh, but I think it's going to be status quo. It is going to be probably low volume. It's probably going to be the ball spread around. I don't see Pittman in the top 24. I don't see Metcalf in the top 24 at the end of the day. I think if you're a Michael Pittman manager in Dynasty, I don't think it's a loss. I just think you didn't improve your Michael Pittman outlook. I don't think his stock is trending. I think his stock is just trending neutral. It's not trending up or down. So it's just kind of a lateral move for me with Michael Pittman. Kenny Gainwell, speaking of Pittsburgh, moving over to Tampa, which means Rachaad White is going to be out the door. Again, Rachaad White linked heavily to Seattle. I think this is good for Kenny G. I think this is really good. It's a fun offense that just vacated. I didn't look, and I should have. I was worried about Kendall. But it just vacated 61 targets from Mike Evans. Obviously, he had his hamstring issue. So he missed half the season. But again, Mike Evans normally 110 to 130 target a season on average player. Chris Godwin's still there. I think this is a great win for Igbukah. So I think it's great for the pass catchers that are there. Jalen McMillan. My brain just went blank. The McMillan that plays. I think it's Jalen McMillan, but I think it's good for Kenny G. I don't think it's bad for Bucky. I just don't think it's great. I think where Bucky is still going to have value and relevance is he's going to be the starter, but Kenny G looked good. He can catch passes. He's versatile. And I think there's issues with Bucky from last year that we probably still don't know and probably won't find out about, because Todd Bowles coming back saying, Bucky will be back this week. It kind of gave me 2 years ago Joe Mixon vibes or 3 years ago when he was in Cincy, where it's like, yeah, Mixon will be back this week. And that was week 4. And then he just never came back. So I don't know if it was off the field issues, personal stuff, or if it truly was an injury and they're just not being forthright. But I think Kenny G to Pittsburgh, if you have Kenny G on your bench somewhere, and a lot of you probably do, I have tons of shares of him because he was just so cheap. I think it's a win for Kenny Gainwell, and I think it's a little tiny bit of a knock for Bucky. I don't think Bucky's not going to go to dust, of course. He's still going to be a great player, but I think it's a little bit of a knock on him. I wrote this show sheet a day ago. So I wrote in here that I think the Max Crosby trade means Flowers is the big winner because they don't have a first-round pick over the next 2 years, and I kind of expected the Ravens to use maybe not a first, possibly a first, but to definitely bring in another wide receiver for Lamar because they cleaned out their wide receiver room. So I think if you have Mark Andrews, I think Mark Andrews is a winner here because he's got no competition anymore and he's got a contract. Isaiah Likely moves to the Giants. Charlie Kohler moves to the Chargers. But I thought with the Max Crosby trade that Flowers was the big winner because of the lack of picks. But now with the news, I assume the picks just come right back. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there's going to – I don't think they can punish the Ravens and take the picks away. Or I just don't – I've never seen this. So I imagine we'll get some more clarity in the coming days. Sorry, Jamie, really quickly. No, Kenny G. I was just – not Kenny Golladay. Kenny Gainwell. But I think for me, Kenny G would be Kenny Galladay's nickname, actually. But I think for me, Flowers is still a guy that I think, depending on what the Ravens do, is actually a winner in free agency because they haven't brought anybody in. Mark Andrews is the big winner no matter what on the Ravens because they cleaned the tight end room out. So unless they're planning on drafting Kenyon Sadiq or they're going to bring in Eli Stowers or, take a shot on one of these young guys and play him, ultimately, I think Mark Andrews wins here because instead of bringing somebody in, they sent everybody away. Speaking of tight ends they sent away, Isaiah Likely to the Giants. I'm going to say the same thing about Isaiah Likely that I said about Kenneth Walker. Pump the brakes. Breathe. Theo Johnson is still there. Isaiah Likely is better. There is no doubt. John Harbaugh came out last year and he said, look, we think that he's going to be, meaning Isaiah Likely, is going to be an all-pro. Maybe he will. But Cam Scatterboo is still there. They just signed Patrick Ricard, which means that they are going to do what the Ravens did. And he's already come out, Harbaugh, and said it. They want to turn their team into a physical, run-first offense. I think Cam Scatterboo is a winner today because they didn't bring anybody in free agency at the running back position. But it would not shock me if they bring somebody in over the next couple of days or weeks. And it would not shock me if the Giants, and you guys are not going to like this, it wouldn't shock me if the Giants took Jeremiah Love. It would really not shock me at all. I do think if they pass on Love, they're going to bring in another running back if they believe Scatterboo's the guy. I think Scatterboo had a great rookie season until he got injured and broke his ankle, but that nasty injury. But at the end of the day, this is a team that has Malik Neighbors. They're going to probably bring in another running back. They've got a mobile quarterback. Theo Johnson is still there. So I don't think that Isaiah Likely is going to suddenly become a top 5 tight end. He's not going to be a Trey McBride. He's not going to be a Brock Bowers. I think he's going to be relevant. I think he's going to be a late round guy in your redraft leagues, that if you just punt the tight end position, which is what I normally do, you can take the shot on it and feel fine with that. There's going to be volume there, but I just don't see Likely jumping into the top 5, maybe the top 8, which it helps, but I think that lands him in the kind of Jake Ferguson territory, and that's just okay. Mike Evans, obviously moving out of Tampa Bay from the East Coast Bay to the West Coast Bay. Come on down. Look, you can make all the electrical substation jokes you want to make. Regardless of the electrical substation, the Niners are the most injured team in the NFL, and Mike Evans has an injury history. So I think at the end of the day, Mike Evans is going to be fantastic for the Niners, for my guys, when he's healthy. The question is the same as it's always been at 32 years old. What does he have left? How healthy is he? Is his hamstring going to be an issue again? So I still think Mike Evans is probably in that like high-end wide receiver 2 territory. I think he's in that 13 to 18, 13 to 24. I just don't see a world if George Kittle can get back for, let's call it 3/4 of the season, with Christian McCaffrey, hopefully with a Ricky Pearsall that can break out finally, hopefully. I don't see a world where Mike Evans is just going to be the target hog and just get everything. It's not possible. So I think for me, it's good for the Niners. I think it's expensive, but it's really only a 1-year contract. If you actually read the contract, and I like contracts. I'm a little nerdy like that. If you read the contract, it's basically a 1-year deal. Even though the money's guaranteed, there's not a ton in year 2 and 3. So I think it's a good deal for Evans. I would not trade for Mike Evans. I saw a guy trade the 201, I think it was, maybe the 202 in one of my leagues yesterday for Mike Evans. I just don't see that as an intelligent investment unless you are a win now team. His roster is not. So even if you're a win now team, I think an early second is too expensive. I would pivot elsewhere if you're looking for a veteran wide receiver, if you just don't like the rookies. But I think it's good for the Niners in real football. I don't know how great it is for his value in Dynasty. I think it's probably the same. He's still an aging 32-year-old wide receiver. Last guy I want to talk about before the 2-minute drill here is Malik Willis. Look, he went from backup 6 games as a sample size. I mentioned the Kurt Warner tweet, 28 meaningful snaps, to being a starter in Miami, 45 million. Sorry, really quickly, Jamie, appreciate that. Yeah, 209 to 211 for Evans. It's about where I would go as well. I might say the 208, but I think that's where I would be as the second third of that second round. Malik Willis, look, he's got weapons, right? He's got Jalen Waddle. He's got Devon Achane. I think Miami's interesting. Miami could be a place where Sadiq lands as a tight end. I think that Miami could be potentially a trade-up candidate or just kind of a sit and hope one of the bigger receivers falls to them. But I think they are one of the teams that could end up going skill position, fantasy relevant skill position in the first round, which certainly would help Willis. I think what I like the most about Willis is probably the same thing that you all like the most about Willis. He runs. At the end of the day, fantasy is about volume, and it is about rushing yards at the quarterback position. There's a reason why, as much as we like Fernando Mendoza, his ceiling is never going to be as high as any of the rushing quarterbacks because he just doesn't have that extra yards and those extra bonus points and those extra touchdowns. So Willis is interesting because of the rushing upside. I don't know what Miami's going to do. I think the consensus is that they're probably going to be more of a defensive football team, kind of grind it out. I think the days of Mike McDaniels, kind of run and throw it and chuck it 70 points on the Broncos probably are gone. I just don't see that offense. I don't know that they have the players. I mean, you need a healthy, younger Tyreek Hill to have that kind of explosive offense. Jalen Waddle hits a 60-yard, catch, and then he doesn't play for a whole quarter afterwards. So I think at the end of the day, you're looking at Malik Willis as a high-end QB2. I think you would need an outlier rushing season for him to get into the top 12. But I think 15 to 18 is probably where he could wind up. So I see Jamie saying, I sell Malik Willis for the 106 to grab Concepcion, but I'm trying to get the 104 plus a second. I think that's a good trade. If it's a super flex league, I think that's maybe a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I think if you're looking at the 104 and the 211 for Malik Willis, that's a trade I would make. I think that's a good trade there, especially because it's just so unknown. It's so unknown. And we've seen guys who come in, as Jameis Winston, have come in as backups and lit the world on fire, and then the next season, he leads the league in interceptions. You know what I mean? So it's just it's question of how much risk you are willing to take on. So I'm gonna do the 2-minute drill. I don't have my my trusty sidekick here to do our clock. I'm gonna put my own clock on, try to keep myself on time. Today's 2-minute drill, I want to talk about one dynasty trade up and one dynasty trade down. If you are in a super flex league, you're going to want to pick inside the top 5. That sounds stupid to everyone that's watching and everyone that's listening. You're all going to say, Phil, of course you want a top 5 pick. But let me tell you the why. Here's why you want a top 5 pick. Love is going to be the 101 in all formats. Mendoza is probably going to be the 102 in super flex. I'm not 100% sold on that, but you have the big 3 in Tate, Lemon, and Tyson. If you are inside the top 5, you're going to guarantee yourself one of those wide receivers. And I think at the end of the draft, you're going to be very happy coming away with one of those big 3 receivers. There is a tier break at all the positions. And for me, the draft really starts at the 106. If you're at the 106, the next tier of wide receivers, again, as of today, Boston, Concepcion, and Cooper Jr., all 3 are being talked about as first-round picks. Even if they're early day 2 picks, they will warrant a first-round rookie pick in Dynasty. If you are at the 6, 7, or 8, I would try to trade up into the top 5 for a higher ceiling, higher caliber wide receiver, because adding a second-rounder to that 6, 7, 8 pick to move up a few spots is going to get you a higher tier wide receiver. You're shooting for ceiling. And ultimately, you're not costing the manager who's trading down a ton of draft spots. Let me make the inverse argument. This is where I would trade down. If you are in the 9 through 12, this is where there will be a lot of parity in the draft. Draft order could end up following the real NFL draft. It could be running backs that get steamed up like Harvey or Johnson from last year, so buyer beware. But if you're in the 9 to 12, I would trade down because as of today, it's a pretty flat tier. No running back has separated himself as to who the clear RB2 is in the class. If I'm in the 9 to 12 range and I can see in my league someone that has 2 early seconds, I would do that. I would make that trade because you're going to end up drafting 2 players from that same tier instead of 1. There's a good crop of solid wide receivers who are going to be early second-round picks. I know Elijah Surratt's name has come up a lot as a potential NFL draft first-rounder. I think he could sneak in to the rookie first-round draft as well. And so ultimately, the running backs, I think, should be mostly second-round picks. There's a chance in a single quarterback league, Mendoza or Stowers, Eli Stowers is still available if you need a onesie position. So if I'm in the 9 to 12, I could see you trying to move up, but I think it's going to take a lot for you to get from the 9 to the 4, the 9 to the 5, whereas the 6, 7, and 8, I think you have a much better chance to get to the 4 or 5. If I'm in the 9 to 12, again, as of today, I wouldn't make the move today, but as we get closer, I would at least consider moving down and getting 2 early seconds to try to take 2 shots versus taking just 1. That's the 2-minute drill for today. I went 10 seconds over, and I have Kendall here to keep me on time. That's going to do it for the show, unless there's any other, comments, questions, anything that you guys have in the comment section, throw them in there. You guys know how to find me. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us a ton, helps the show. You can follow me on X. You can follow me on Instagram, of course, Patreon and Spotify. My sleeper handle is at P Ruskin. Shoot me a DM if you have any questions about trades. If you want any of my additional content, I would love to network with you. If you want to get any of my articles, shoot me that DM, and you can definitely find me on Sleeper. It's actually the easiest way to find me because I'm on it all the time and I constantly check the messages. So at P Ruskin on Sleeper. Next week we'll be back. Hopefully Kendall's house and his family are nice and safe. He'll be back with me. And we will continue breaking down a lot of these rookies as we get closer to the NFL draft to get you guys ready to dominate your rookie drafts. That's going to do it for the show tonight. As always, thanks for joining us here at the Extra Point. And of course, if you have any other questions, y'all know how to find me. We out.
Wanted to white fantasy is the play. Marking nothing, but I tune every Friday. Strategies provided, I will